Good morning. That's a nice response, thank you. My name is Purvi Patel. I'm here on behalf of the MEPA office, Massachusetts Environmental Policy Act. I'm going to have Jeff Carlson come up for a moment and say some words on behalf of the Conservation Commission.
Good morning, everybody. We're only in front of us today. We do have a quorum of the local Conservation Commission present, so under advice of council, the commission is just going to call their posted field viewing to order.
Hi, so at this time we are calling the Nantucket Conservation Commission field viewing to order.
Great. So following this meeting, which is a MEPA consultation session, it is not a hearing for the purposes that I am not recording. This is being recorded voluntarily. I'm not sure exactly on whose behalf. And so it's a nice way for me for you to be able to hear whoever's up here as well. The MEPA office is here on behalf of Secretary Kathleen Theoharides. I was here with you about 5 years ago for the shorter installation of the geotubes, and so I have some familiarity with the project. Welcome to those that are familiar, and welcome to those that are new. I will provide a brief overview of the MEPA review process. Please know that I will be here to answer questions that you have following this meeting so that you can ask your questions and feel comfortable with the public process. MEPA jurisdiction is for those projects that require state agency action, which can be a permit, a land transfer from the state, or financial assistance. For this project, there is a pending superseding order of conditions because the order of conditions was denied by the Conservation Commission for the project that we are reviewing. And then also, the duality is that there is a threshold that is exceeded in the MEPA regulations. That threshold has to do with coastal bank alteration and other wetland alterations, including coastal beach. And also land subject to coastal storm flowage, otherwise known as the 100-year floodplain or flood. So that is the reason that we are here for MEPA. What you should know is that we are not a permitting agency. We do not issue a permit. Neither do we make an assertion or a statement whether a project is good or bad. We take it into account all of the information that is provided by the proponent, take into account public comment on the project, and then the secretary makes her decision whether the project is able to go to state permitting or if additional MEPA review is required. For this project, it is not categorically over a threshold which requires an environmental impact report. So it is not categorically, it does not exceed any EIR, environmental impact report thresholds. The secretary always has discretion to require an EIR if she so determines. Okay, so we're reviewing the project as it is right now. It's a notice of project change because they are looking to expand the current geotube installation to the north and to the south. The project is proposed by the proponent, the SBPF, and I think maybe the town. I'm sorry, that was previous, that's the town. And it is not being proposed by the MEPA office. So while this is a MEPA consultation session, I am learning in the same way that you are and asking questions the same way that you are. Comments are due in writing to the MEPA office by September 10th. And then the secretary will issue her decision 10 days hence on September 20th. Okay, so the comments have to come into the office by writing. I do take notes, but as I indicated, this is not a formal hearing, and I am not recording what you are saying. I will be providing each of the commenters 3 minutes to provide your comments. Please note that I would hope that you would keep your comments germane to the review at hand. You're welcome to speak about your personal feelings, but if you could just please be really clear about the jurisdiction and the concerns you have related to MIPA review, that would be the most helpful for my purposes in reviewing the project. Do I have any questions right now?
Yes.
Yes, sir.
You said written comments. Can they be via email or must they be pen and paper?
No, they may absolutely be by email. And if you do submit them by email, please don't feel the need to also then submit them through fax or mail. And we now have a improvement in our MIPA website where if you were to go onto the website and go to providing comments, you may submit them directly on the website portal. Okay, so that would be just typing in MIPA Office, Environmental Monitor, and you will see a tab at the top. This way it allows you to directly enter your information. You can also see, at some point I hope, that which other comments have been submitted by the project. So the Mass DEP will be issuing their superseding order, and that is the only permit so far. I believe there is some jurisdiction by the Natural Heritage and Endangered Species Program, and from what the NPC discloses, there may be some conditions so that there is no take of a rare or endangered species. Okay, so I'll have the proponent come up and provide some context and some background on the project, and then I will ask DEP if they have any questions and would like to say anything, and then I'll start our timed comments. And thank you very much. Yes?
The website address?
That's a really good question. Do you know, because it's changed several times, and so I always find it, because I have it as a favorite, but if I was to tell somebody, I'd tell them to look up the MIPA office. MIPA, M-E-P-A, MIPA. Yes. And most assuredly, you will get to our offices. My name is Purvi Patel. In addition, there's a sign-in sheet at the back. This is the only way I know that there's a lot of you, so I won't remember everyone's names. If I have supplemental information that I request from the proponent, and we want to distribute to you folks to have that additional information. That's the only way I know how to distribute it to you or provide additional information. Okay, so the MIPA office, I'm Purvi Patel. My website is very clearly, easily accessible. It's also written on the sign-in sheet, purvi.patel@mass.gov, so you can submit the comments directly to me or through the portal. All right, following this consultation session, we will go out to the site and view the geotubes as they are currently installed from the top, and then hopefully be able to make it down to the toe of the bank and see them from that perspective. All right, thank you.
Good morning. I am Stephen Cohen. I'm a local attorney. I'm counsel for SBPF, and I'm going to address what happened here in very sort of general, broad, hopefully plain English terms, and then I'll be followed up by Dwight Dunk, who's the lead engineer on this, and we'll get into the details a little bit on the engineering and design and regulatory applicability, or regulatory satisfaction of the project for the state and local regulations. So I think most of you know that this SBPF has been at coastal erosion protection in this area of the island for over 25 years. And in 2013, due to a series of large storms, there were losses on the Siasconset Bluff of some places of 10, 20, 30 feet, essentially due to sloughing of the bank where the tows were undermined. And this was the first time that that was happening, both in places that were very large scale, losses, and also in places where there had been other erosion protection in place, like terracing and things like that. And so the decision was made jointly with the town to file for a 4,000-foot rock revetment, which is a wall. That application went to the Conservation Commission and was, during the proceeding of that application, it became apparent that it wasn't going to be approved in time to be installed for the next storm season. So SBPF filed for an emergency permit the day before Thanksgiving. That was fun. For approval to install a temporary geotube project, and that's how we ended up on the geotubes. They are both much faster and easier to install and faster and easier to remove if need be. That approval was denied and then approved at the state level and was installed at a 3-tier system. And then we went back to the Conservation Commission and applied to have that temporary approval made permanent. That was also denied at the local level and appealed to the state DEP and was approved with a second superseding order of conditions that allowed for a 4th level to be installed and for set in place sand mitigation and other monitoring and mitigation at the 22 yards per cubic feet and those kind of things that we have in the order. Then we applied, with the appeals pending, there was a settlement that was reached to go forward with a 4,000-foot linear foot geotube project instead of the 4,000 linear foot rock revetment project. And that rock revetment project was withdrawn, and we went forward with just the geotube project. And that settlement also reduced the length of the project to 950 feet on a temporary basis. But the difference between the original temporary permit and the temporary nature of that approval was that it was designed to be a permanent installation with a expansion to the 4,000 linear feet after a 3-year waiting period in which the project would be studied and reviewed to see what improvements could be made before the larger project was put in. So I want to be very clear that although there are discussions of timing, that the original temporariness was on an actual temporary permit, and the second was on whether or not the project would be installed long-term or what design and mitigation would be used for the long-term project. So in 2015, the additional tiers of the project were installed, the sand mitigation was continued and carried through, and we also worked with the town. Many of you were involved in trying to come up with alternative access and ways to move the road and the utilities and those kind of things to see if any of the emergency situation could be abated. That was successful in determining that there are potentially emergency access routes that could be created, but not successful in terms of figuring out a way to relocate the road or otherwise abate the situation. In other words, it's a permanent problem that needs either a permanent solution, and that there was no identification of a non-protective way to deal with the situation. The geotubes were installed at the 4th tier level under a notice of intent and an order of condition issued by the Conservation Commission under its authority under state and local law. So in other words, those were not they were not issued under a state permit or an appeal permit. They were issued by a local regulatory body. During that time, all the mitigation was done, all of the annual reports were submitted, all of the post-storm reports and assessments were done, and we worked with engineering firms to determine what kind of improvements to the system would be best in order to make sure that the long-term project both had the best results and the best mitigation. We then filed, after the 3-year waiting period, for the 4,000 linear foot project with about 750 feet expansion to the north and about 1,900 linear foot expansion to the south, with some changes to the key aspects of the project. And so those changes involved adjusting the monitoring so that it would capture both more applicable information and more useful information, because we found that we weren't always capturing the right information, or we weren't capturing it at the right times or in the right ways, and that we learned some lessons there. So there were adjustments to the monitoring protocols. We also learned that the sand mitigation was being done in a very simplified way, and that potentially doing an adaptive process would allow for a better implementation of the sand so that it would provide better protection and so that it would allow for the geotubes to be covered over faster and so that less truck trips would be required to produce the sand that was needed at the site. So we found that there was both a process and a protective way to improve doing the sand. We looked at the returns on the ends and determined that both the angle and the materials of those returns could be adjusted for better results to deal with end scour, and that the ends could also be pulled in so that the system could be slightly shorter by having the ends act as part of the protective system. During the year-long approval process that involved more meetings than I care to count, we went through a process of sort of revisiting the same concerns where the question was, all the advocates were making points, and the question was, well, what if somebody wasn't an advocate? What if there was an independent peer review looking at this information? So the town hired at SBPF's expense an independent peer review to look at both the questions that had repeatedly come up during that process and also all of the data that was in the files to get some advice for the Conservation Commission from someone who was not advocating for any of the sides. That review, I think, was highly in favor of the position advocated by SBPF because it determined that when the tubes are uncovered during storms and then after storms until they can be recovered, that only had short-term impacts and visual impacts, but it had no long-term impacts after they were recovered. That report did say that having the ends uncovered had potentially greater impacts on end scour, but that those end scour impacts could be adjusted through sand mitigation and design changes so that it differentiated between those two, and it suggested a solution for the one that was more problematic. It determined that the long-term viability of the project would require an incredible amount of sand that was going to be, expensive and cumbersome to provide, and suggested that this project have a failure trigger that if the walkable beach was not maintained and if the sand wasn't maintained, that there should be an ability to have it removed, and that trigger already exists in the current permitting, and we had discussed ways in which it could be improved in a future permit. The peer advisor looked at the timing of the sand contribution, and I think was highly important in determining that the timing of the sand, which had been discussed for hours and hours, was not really the key critical issue as it had been focused on, and really it was the volume of sand that was important, and I think sided with the applicant on that issue. So we were really happy with how the peer review went in its analysis of both the engineering and the file and the questions that had been raised. And frankly, we're disappointed and surprised when the Conservation Commission went from having previously a 4-3 vote in favor to a 4-3 vote against, because the legal issues that were in front of the commission were essentially the same legal issues in the same marine environment with the same design, with only proposed improvements to the design and mitigation and failure criteria and other conditions in the approval. So that was a disappointing and surprising result. We are now, SBPF is now appealing that decision at the state level and at the local level because there are actually a state and local permit. The state appeal is at DEP and the local appeal is at the Superior Court. And I think it's important to note that the state appeal is not asking the state to tell the local Conservation Commission that we're overruling you. It's actually asking the state to weigh in on its own regulations and tell DEP and tell the Concom whether or not they got it right, which I think is significantly different from whether or not they're overruling them on a sort of a subjective decision-making position. DEP and Concom have both made rulings that are in favor of this project on its merits and under the regulations, under the proposal that was put forward without the improvements that are now. So I hope that that will be the net result of this process. Thank you. And Dwight Dunk from Epsilon, again, will get into the details of it. Thank you, Dwight.
I just want to, for people who don't have a copy of the NPC in front of them.
Go to the mic for the recording, please.
Sure. I just provided some handouts that kind of summarize some key points from the notice of project change. I just wanted to hand those out to folks in case you don't have the NPC in front of you. I know some people do, some people have read it, some people may not have. So I'll just hand these out. I don't have enough for everybody, so people can share. But I wanted Porvy to have one as well as the folks from DEP. Hand these out. And sure.
And
Yep.
I'm just going to say, again, Purvi Patel, I will forward this as a PDF to anyone that is listed on the sign-in sheet. And then you guys can share it with those that may be interested in having a copy.
Right. My name is Dwight Dunk with Epsilon Associates. I'm an environmental scientist with the firm, a principal of the firm, with over 30 years of experience dealing with the Massachusetts Wetlands Protection Act and other state regulatory regulations relative to wetlands and waterways, as well as federal, state, and local experience and projects throughout the country and some overseas. So I've been working on this project with my colleagues at Epsilon. And as Porvy mentioned, this is a joint session, MEPA consultation session, and DEP site visit for the SOC. As Stephen mentioned, this is a continuation of the existing project that's in place with the linear extension to bring the full length of the project to just shy of 2,700 linear feet. We'll take the approximately 950-foot existing project, extend it 767 feet to the north, 1,916 feet to the south. The purpose of the project, and with this being a continuation, that's why it's filed as a notice of project change with MEPA. The purpose of the project is to protect pre-1978 homes that are present along the coastal bank, 3 to the north of the existing project, 14 to the south of the existing project, as well as roadway and public infrastructure, where there are some lots without homes at number 85 Baxter Road, and lots 107, 107A Baxter Road, and then with an extension of the return onto 117 Baxter Road needed to protect the house at 115. The purpose and need, as stated in the NPC, and throughout the NOI process, as I mentioned, is protect pre-1978 homes, which is allowed in the wetlands protection regulations. There was a previous standard established that during the original project back after the storms of 2012 and 2013, that homes within 40 feet of the top of the coastal bank were in imminent danger, and that the roadway within 65 feet is in imminent danger. That 65 feet was taking the 40 feet for the homes, adding 25 feet based on a geotechnical engineer's recommendation of needing to maintain 25 horizontal feet from the edge of the roadway to the top of the coastal bank. So therefore, a 65-foot threshold was established. Currently, within the extension project length, there are 7 homes within 40 feet of the top of the coastal bank, with 2 others less than 45 feet or less. And the roadway in some of these areas, in these 2 areas without homes, are less than 65 feet. And that's at 107 and 85 Baxter Road. Included with the notice of intent were a couple of figures of the homes at 115 and 109, And there's also a presentation of figures 3 through 6 that show all the offsets of the homes from the top of the coastal bank. Part of the MEPA review, and actually part of the Wetlands Protection Regulation review, is a review of alternatives. As Stephen mentioned, the SBPF as a private entity has been looking at ways to protect the coastal bank from erosion and preserve the neighborhood of Siasconset. And over that years, through both practice and in theory, numerous alternatives have been explored by the SBPF. Those are listed in the NPC on page 37. I won't list them all, but a couple of the key ones: 17 of the 22 homes on the east side of the road have been relocated, either off the sites or as far to the west as possible. There was a dewatering, kind of a novel idea of dewatering the beach in a way to stem erosion. That proved unsuccessful. Many years ago, there had been coir terracing proposed and approved and installed. I think the storms of 2012 and 2013 show that those are not effective with the wave environment that we have out here in Siasconset. Those materials, the coir or coir or coconut fiber, however you want to say it, those materials in a marine environment are generally structurally sound and work for a period of 3 to 5 years in a marine environment. They break down over time and they lose their effectiveness and need to be replaced and reinstalled over time. And as was mentioned, the stone revetment prior to that was the marine mattress idea, which is very similar. But through all those alternatives that have been explored, as well as beach nourishment and others, the geotubes were installed. They've been installed for 6 years, and they have performed well in their function of stabilizing that section of the coastal bank. And through these years of monitoring the geotubes, those were selected as the preferred alternative. As was mentioned in the SOC issued by the state, SE 482610, and echoed in the order of conditions subsequently issued by the Conservation Commission, SE 4824, the idea was to wait until at least 3 years, until January of 2018, to issue to submit a notice of intent for an extension to the north and south. And in that time, the idea was to look at, is this the right solution? Are there some other solutions? And the performance of the system has documented that it's a good solution. We also present the construction overview just so that people can see what type of construction there is. It's already been constructed, so we have a good feel for exactly what's needed. I'm not going to go into detail. That's provided in the notice of project change. But the comparison of the projects, as I mentioned, part of the waiting period was to monitor it, see if this is the right solution. Is a different solution warranted? Are there changes that would make the system better? So based on what we've observed out there, the coastal engineer, Baird Associates, has designed the system. It's again, a 4-tier geotube system with the geotubes placed on top of each other, stepped back at an angle. The minor design change with these is to set the lowest tier at -3 feet, mean low water, while the existing system is at 0 feet, mean low water. The idea is to have a lower toe because if there is some scour along the toe, it's deeper and would avoid any undermining. We did not see undermining back in March of 2018 with those successive storms. We saw the toe being exposed, but it didn't get undermined. But the idea here is to make it just a tad bit lower. The other thing is 4 tiers are warranted because The settlement of the tubes brings the wave height, the height of the waves that are generated during storms up above the third tier. And so we're trying to protect that coastal bluff that's landward of the tubes from being exposed to waves and thus eroded. And just with a minimal sea level rise of only 1 foot, it would still be overtopped. There are numerous models out there as to what the sea level rise would be. We're not suggesting that sea level rise is only 1 feet, will only be 1 foot, but we're saying with even just 1 foot, that fourth tier is needed based on wave run-up and sea level rise. We provided in the NPC a comparison of the projects. I just want to highlight that, number one, as I mentioned, the lowest geotube is 3 feet lower. We also requested a special condition to have the ability to extend the returns. The returns are the angles from the face of the geotubes. They angle back into the coastal bank at a slight angle. That design is there to minimize wave reflection. And about a year ago, last November, the SBPF requested an amendment to the existing order of conditions to install Coya return extensions. The existing unprotected bluff, it's not protected, therefore it does experience erosion. There would continue to be, at the ends, there would be that erosion of the bluff and leaving a gap between the returns and the bluff. So the idea is those extensions would be Coya returns. And we've requested a special condition that would allow the installation of those Coya returns in the future throughout the life of the order without needing to go back to the Conservation Commission for an amendment. The monitoring program has been quite extensive with shoreline monitoring quarterly, bathymetric surveys semi-annually, underwater videos semi-annually, post-storm event inspections, and a template survey. The sand cover on the geotubes, which we call a sand template, is essentially an on-site stockpile of sand that can be used to recover the geotubes after they get exposed during an erosion event, during a storm event. And the changes to the monitoring plan would be to have the shoreline change be semi-annually as opposed to quarterly, the bathymetric survey annually, the underwater video once every 3 years. The peer reviewer who reviews the annual reports kind of agrees that the benthic environment, the offshore cobble, we're not seeing any covering of that with sand that washes off the template. Continue with the post-storm inspections and to have a template survey annually. So we've reviewed purpose and need, alternatives, the design. Now, the other aspect is the mitigation. So when we have a project, how do we mitigate for potential adverse effects to the wetland resource areas of Coastal Bank and Coastal Beach? And the proposal here, the primary one, is the sand mitigation program. The existing order of conditions calls for placing 22 cubic yards per linear foot every year onto the template. As I mentioned, that's the on-site stockpile. And what happens is after erosion events, that sand is pushed off the top of the template onto the face, onto the angled face to recover the tubes. That way sand is available to be contributed off of the template into the littoral drift system to make up for the sediment that would otherwise be contributed to the littoral drift system off of the coastal bank. The coastal bank, for the length-weighted average for this nearly 4,000 feet, the length-weighted average of contribution from the existing coastal bank is between 7.7 and 8.8 cubic yards per linear foot every year. We've been using the 8.8 to be a little more conservative. Now, the 22 annual per year is about 2.5 times what naturally is being contributed off that length-weighted average of the coastal bank. What's been proposed with the current notice of intent is rather than placing 22 cubic yards every year, is to make sure that the template, the on-site stockpile, has a volume of sand that's equal to 22 cubic yards per linear foot on the template at the beginning of each storm season. Following that storm season, as is done now, there'd be a survey of the template. We monitor, we measure how much sand has been lost off the template, and then refill the template to that 22 cubic yards per linear foot. We also, in that adaptive management, that's provided in attachment I to the notice of intent, to the notice of project change. We have, provided that we would contribute or refill it to 22 cubic feet based on what was lost the previous year, or 8.8 cubic yards per foot, whichever is greater. So in a year that's a low storm season and there's only 5 or 6 cubic yards per foot, there'll be 8.8 added. If there's a year with storms and it's 10 cubic yards per linear foot, 10 would be added to refill it to the 22. So that's the primary mitigation. There's much more detail that's in the notice project change, trying to keep it brief. The performance standards, which is what DEP and MEPA look at, is does this project comply with the Wetlands Protection Act regulations? The resource areas here are coastal bank and coastal beach. Coastal bank in 310 CMR 1030 subsection 3 allows that, it says, basically no new coastal engineering structures shall be permitted except when required to prevent storm damage to buildings constructed prior to the effective date of the act, effective date of the regulations, which was August 10th, 1978. That's why I mentioned all these homes are pre-1978 homes. So, a coastal engineering structure shall be permitted to protect those homes, protect those buildings. In order to meet this standard, we need to show that we're using the best available measures to avoid adverse effects. The best available measures are those that are engineeringly and technically feasible and available. And what the measures that are included here are the design of the geotubes with a step back, vertical step back, as well as shallow angle returns to minimize reflection, and lowering the bottom of the tubes to make sure that there's no undermining of the tubes should there be any scour along the linear toe. The other thing is that there's no alternatives to protect the buildings other than the coastal engineering structure. I think through the 25 years of looking at options, both in practice and in theory, that this has proven to be an effective coastal engineering structure, and that other structures are not there, other options are not there. They have been explored over the 25 years. And that protective planting be included. And as described, there will be above the template, the exposed areas of exposed bluff will be replanted with beach grass. In areas to the south where we have the bluff is still vegetated, but showing signs of block erosion and slope failure, those areas that don't have vegetation would be revegetated. The performance standards for beach basically say we should not allow projects that would have an adverse effect on beaches, increasing erosion, decreasing the volume, or changing the form, except for projects permitted under 310 CMR 1030 subsection 3. That means except for projects that are there to protect pre-1978 buildings, which this is filed under. As part of the performance standards, there's also for both of those resource areas is the provision that a project shall not adversely affect the habitat of state-listed wildlife. We coordinated with the Natural Heritage Endangered Species Program, also known as NHESP, or Natural Heritage. We've received written correspondence from them that's in the record that identifies conditions that, provided those conditions are included in an order of conditions, will not have, they've determined those, then the project would have no adverse effect on the resource and habitats protected under the Wetlands Protection Act and would avoid the take pursuant to MESA. In conclusion, we've shown in there through in the notice of intent, as well as during the whole public hearing process, and summarized in the notice of project change, the fact that this project has not, through all that monitoring, we've demonstrated that there's been no adverse effect to the beach in front of the geotubes or immediately adjacent to the geotubes. Table 5.6 in the notice of project change, what we see there is the data from 10 profiles or cross sections of the beach. 8 of those show accretion, 2 show erosion or retreat. The retreat is minimal. In fact, at the profile 92, there was actually a few years that there was some retreat, and then for the last couple of years there's actually been accretion, but that net over this period of time does show some minor accretion. And these profiles are looking at sections 100 and 200 feet to the north and 200 and 300 feet to the south. You start getting far beyond that, the distance, that you start getting far afield from the existing geotubes. Trying to attribute any shoreline change to the geotubes becomes very tenuous. So in conclusion, what we've tried to demonstrate in the notice of project change, as well as in the notice of intent and through that hearing process, that the state interests of the Wetlands Protection Act are met and protected by the proposed project. Coastal banks are presumed significant to the storm damage prevention, flood control, and project shall not have an adverse effect and cause increased erosion of coastal banks. The purpose of this project is to stabilize the coastal bank. We've also demonstrated through the years of data collection that we're not having an adverse effect to the beach, loss of beach in front of the existing project or to the immediate north or south, as shown in that table that I referenced. And this 900 feet serves as kind of a good full-scale pilot for the longer project, such that these lack of adverse effects to the resource areas and the ability to protect the interests of the act would be also provided by the linear extension to the existing project. With that, I'll just hand it back to Porvi. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I would like to reiterate that the MEPA review is not a permitting authority, and that we're here to sort of, as a public disclosure process, to make sure that we hear comments from both proponents and opponents, and even those neutral, on the project and its design, and afford them opportunity to comment and be part of that public record. I'd like to ask DEP to step up and sort of give you an overview of the superseding order of conditions review process. So this is, again, as Dwight mentioned, a joint MEPA consultation session and superseding order of conditions site visit. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Nathan Corcoran. I'm the coastal geologist with Mass DEP. Porvi went over the process pretty well. Just want to reiterate, it's not a public hearing, and this is no decisions will be made in the field today. So we're here to issue the superseding order of conditions. First, the project needs to get the certificate from the secretary, and then we would issue the superseding order of conditions. Conditions can be appealed within 10 days, and that would be subject to an adjudicatory hearing. And besides that, we'll let the Concom speak, and then answer any comments or questions that you guys have.
Thanks, Nate. And Nate has indicated to me, this is as a courtesy, that he is happy to, if you were to submit comments to me through directly to my email address, purvi.patel@mass.gov, that you could also CC him. But he will, following the conclusion of MIPA review, if no further MIPA review is determined by the secretary, will receive a copy of all of the comments that are part of the public record. So that will be used to inform any decision that the department makes concerning this project. Okay, so I'm not sure if, Jeff, if the Conservation Commission did want to make a statement or, thank you.
Sure. Good afternoon at this point for everyone. Just to kind of recap the Conservation Commission's public hearing process and the process that was gone through that has led us to the point related to the superseding order of conditions. The Conservation Commission heard and deliberated this matter, reviewing the geotube expansion project for the better part of 8 to 9 months through a special hearing process. Where it was vetted, and this project was reviewed against the performance standards, both state and locally, for the resource areas included being coastal beach, coastal dune, land subject to coastal storm flowage, and coastal bank. In summary from those hearings and after much debate, a vote was taken that was 4-3 to issue a negative order of conditions denying the project. The basis of that denial being that they could not condition the project they felt to meet the performance standards under both the state and local act. So that denial was issued against both the local bylaw and the state act. I know we're here today primarily for the state act because they felt that they were unable to condition it to meet those performance standards to ensure no adverse impact to those resource areas. I think the work the commission and the testimony that was given in the debate speaks for itself for that group, and we encourage anyone to watch those hearings. They're all available if they'd like to see that testimony directly. And I think they've applied their rules and did their job, and they've issued the decision that they have. That's pretty straightforward. So, pretty short.
Certainly the commission is to be commended on their additional level of work. So we'll open it up to public comments. I'm just getting my timer out so I can, I'm sure I won't need to, right? This lovely gentleman taking the video has provided a mic and somebody is holding it. Oh, wonderful. And so this is interesting in that you will not hear sort of yourself being recorded, but that he will hear it, and then later on you will hear, if you are providing comments, you will hear your voice quite clearly. So please do speak right into the microphone, and we'll have our first commenter. Thank you, sir. If you could provide that. So you can let me know if you have a comment in general, if you have a comment regarding MIPA review, or if you have a question for Mass DEP, or if you have a question for the proponent, okay? All three very separate entities. And I will say that I did mention this, and thank you, Jeff, for reminding me, MIPA jurisdiction, excuse me one moment, sir. MIPA jurisdiction, it does not cover local bylaws and local permits, okay? So MIPA is particularly and specifically related to state agency actions. Thank you.
So is this, maybe I'm
So you-
standing right here. I can just,
You're welcome to use the mic. I'm loud, but not everyone is.
hello, everyone. I am Josh Posner, president of Siasconset Beach Preservation Fund, and I'm very happy to be here to say a few words after my little health adventure of the past few months. First, I want to thank everybody for coming out. This is a tremendous, tremendous turnout and testimony to the desire on the part of the people of Siasconset to do the right thing and to protect our community in a way that is environmentally responsible. My message is simple. The issue of erosion protection is being presented by some people as an either-or question. Either you're protecting our beautiful beaches or you're not. They say that those of us wanting to protect our homes and our community are doing so at the expense of the beaches. To them, it's either or. However well-intentioned some of them are, they're misrepresenting the facts. Our community has gone to extraordinary lengths to find a reasonable middle ground, a pragmatic approach to our erosion crisis. If we were to take the kind of extreme position that project opponents are taking, we might be saying, let's install a rock revetment, as is done in some 3,000 other coastal properties in Massachusetts. If the revetment has an impact on other beaches, that's no more our concern than it is for the other 3,000 properties. That is what a true battle of either-or extremes might look like. In fact, some in our community are asking exactly that. If we're going to have to fight this out in court for years, why don't we just take an extreme position like the opponents are taking? Instead, from the outset, SBPF has sought to work cooperatively with the town and to find a middle ground that responds to every single legitimate concern that's been raised. Let me remind you of the practical middle ground steps that we have taken. In 2013, after the winter storms caused so much erosion that the town started to plan for the closure of Baxter Road, SBPF entered into a public-private partnership with the town. A memorandum of understanding was voted and signed by the Board of Selectmen, outlining our joint way forward. It is still in effect today. Number two, the parties agreed to a phased installation of 4,000 feet of erosion protection, initially intended to be a rock revetment. The MOU was modified a few months later to make the first phase into the geotube system that's in place today. As part of that system, we agreed to provide tons and tons of sand on top of the geotubes in an amount that is more than twice the historical rate of erosion. We agreed to an extraordinary and costly set of regular monitoring requirements, surveying the coastline, measuring the impacts of the beach and the ocean floor at a level not seen anywhere in Nantucket or Massachusetts. We agreed to a rigorous set of failure and success criteria so there would be bright lines potentially requiring project removal. Even with all of this in place, the Nantucket Conservation Commission has voted on multiple occasions to deny the project, and then when the state overrode their denial, even decided to appeal the state's decision. June's CONCOM vote to deny is again another in this series in which they are unhappy with the existing law and feel that it's their, instead of following their job, which is to enforce the existing law. So now we have 6 years of monitoring showing that there's been no impact on neighboring beaches. I know I may be I'm getting closer to the end here. I have a list of other middle ground things that we have done to work cooperatively with the town. And there have been times when we've gotten into difficulties, and it's been the CONCOM's position that we should fight it out in court at whatever cost and however long it takes. But other leaders in the town have said, let's sit down and try and work things out. And we hope that that is something that can happen again. Let me end where I began. This should not be about either or. We have a great tradition in Nantucket of summer people and year-round people working together, forming real friendships. We need to resist in our special island the crazy, divisive culture that has run rampant in what we all refer to as America. Politicians and ideologues may benefit from the either-or world, but it is not good for our community. We have rejected this before, and we need to find the way to work together again to resolve this issue. Once the virus of either-or passes, and we can once again remember that few things are as simple as that, I have no doubt that cooler heads, the rule of law, and common sense can prevail. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Now I sound like I'm not going to be firm, but I'll give you 4 minutes because I gave this gentleman.
Some people have been leaving early, and there's a sign-up sheet, and they've asked to be signed up.
Okay.
So could you announce there's a sign-up sheet in the back for early leavers?
Oh yes, there's 5 pages of sign-up sheets. So you're welcome to take one and then pass it along if you feel that way you can make sure everyone signs up. Also, you do know your neighbors. It seems like a very friendly group, and so do pass along. I'm not being facetious. So do pass along the information if you feel like your neighbor or a friend has not gotten the information. Come on up, sir. We can just use this mic up here if you don't mind. 4 minutes, please. And if we do have time at the end, it's 10 after 12, then we can have people come back for a second round.
No, I'm not going to take more than 5 minutes, assuming my questions are answered. First of all, I find it terribly insulting for somebody to come here and say that anybody who has questions, not necessarily opposition, but questions of fact about this project are extremists and deranged and this rabid society. This is what's going on in this country today, and I resent it. So I think it's disgraceful that you're... Yes, he did. He said there's the crazies on the... Look, okay. Anyway, my questions for you are not directly related to the approval, but questions that I have been asking for a number of years. For example, under the expanded project, have you been told exactly how many 12-wheel truckloads will be going through Sconset every year and the damage that does to the environmental pollution and to the roads? Secondly, have they told you how long the existing sand pits are going to, on the islet, are going to support the mitigation? They have indicated that the price of sand will go up. We have heard no cost projections. I'd like to know the annual projected cost of the first year of the project, and secondly, what the project is for let's just say for the first 10 years, including inflation on the cost of sand. And most critically of all, nowhere has it been said who exactly is going to pay for this, because in the end, my feeling is that we are all going to pay for it, and you have a right to know how much it's going to cost. I'm not saying that we are against, that I am against the project. I just want to make sure that the mitigation continues, and it continues in perpetuity, and that there is somebody there that is going to pay for it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dwight, did you want to provide a response in terms of the failure criteria or anything with like that kind of specificity? I know that SPF, I assume, and I'm going under the understanding that the fund is being managed by the SBPF, and that is their responsibility, and that's one of the failure criteria. So if you would like to speak to that?
Correct.
Make any corrections?
The comments have been essentially asked and answered throughout the notice of intent process. Those comments in terms of the length of the project, the costs and whatnot are being borne by SBPF and have been addressed in the record. And I think those comments need to be provided in writing as opposed to getting into a response and comment right now. Okay, those were a large number of comments. I suggest the commenter provide them in writing. We have addressed most of those comments throughout the notice of intent process.
You're paid to do this. We're just,
The
Yeah, I'd like to know if you can direct them to those answers in the notice of project change.
the
Truck trips,
the truck trips are not presented in the notice of project change.
so that can be supplemental information that you provide,
Yes.
okay?
How's that subject matter jurisdictional?
It is, because that's a good question, actually.
Right.
It's not jurisdictional, so it wouldn't be in the project, notice of project change. It's
There's a
outside the
table
jurisdiction of
that
the,
asks for that information in the.
but it's outside of the SOC review, so therefore it's outside of NEPA jurisdiction. We can provide some information on it, but it's clearly outside of NEPA jurisdiction.
Right. The notice of project change has identified that the sand is an off-site sand source. So in terms of, looking at on-island sources as well as off-island sources, it's not taking sand from the beach or the littoral system and putting it on there. It's from an off-site sand source. And, that's identified in the notice of project change.
And there's a fund that.
The
is already set up.
the SBPF, as part of the order of conditions, has to have a fund to support the project as well as its removal if it doesn't meet the failure criteria. And that fund is established.
I'll just wait for you to come up and ask your question at the front. Thanks.
Yeah. And I think in terms of the fund, the answer is there a fund, yes or no? And is it provided to support the project and remove it if needed? And the answer is yes.
And I would like to know the truck trips. I think it is relevant. It's an impact that's borne by the project installation.
First of all, I think some of those questions are entirely inappropriate in their tone, and I'd appreciate it if you'd be a little more respectful. Second of all, the truck trip question has been asked and answered literally dozens of times. All those calculations were provided in the files. All of the tickets are provided when the sand is delivered. For each dump truckload of sand that's delivered, there's a ticket. And though Jeff has, I don't know how many file cabinets full of tickets, the reason why we don't have the specific answer to that question is because part of the sand mitigation question determines how much sand is delivered and how much and how often it's done. So it's a speculative question based on what the approval was. So we can't tell you how many truck trips are involved until we have an answer on how much sand and how often. But the math is really simple. It's how big the truck is and how much sand you're delivering and how much you're doing. So the suggestion that this information is not out there is a really, really disrespectful and misleading question. And people that have been involved in this project should understand that that question has been heavily, heavily addressed. SBPF has paid for every nickel of this project and has continued to. SBPF has a escrow on hand that's paid to the town for the removal of the project. These suggestions again, this is how the whole project has gone. We ask a question, we answer a question, and then there's a disrespectful suggestion that this has never been addressed. So I'd really appreciate it if we could stop doing that.
Thanks, Stephen. I actually really concur with Stephen. I would like this to be civil. This was very civil last year, and I understand there's a lot of heated sort of concerns. So please do sort of show that respect for the process that we're undertaking right now. And I'm asking that question, Stephen, because I have not been privy to the order of condition process, and I would like to know what those are. I can now understand that the adaptive process or nature of putting that sand there makes it sort of an ebb and flow sort of number for the number of trips. But I imagine that you can sort of conservatively estimate, and seems like you have that data. Okay.
We can provide the data from
The past.
the past.
Okay.
That provides
A guideline, if you were to multiply it by the number of the length, okay. Next commenter? Yes, sir? Do you want me to bring the microphone to you? Oh, okay, thank you. Thank you. Sure. Thank you for coming up here. If you could state your name and your address, please.
Helmut Weimar, involved with SBPF. I just want to step back to a much broader perspective than this 4,000 feet along a historic community of Sconset, but nonetheless only 4,000 feet. We are faced with very clearly rising sea levels. We are faced with very clearly increased storm intensities. And Nantucket's an island. Who knows exactly when the full thrust of sea level rise, whether it's 2 or 3 feet or whether it's 10 feet, how it evolves and when it comes, but it, as a kind of reasonable judging person, it seems quite clear that's where the island's headed. And arguably, I think irrefutably, it's Baxter Road today, it's Sconset Village tomorrow, and countless other shorelines, the whole island. And the island's going to have to make decisions as to what it's going to do where. But to take a position that the island's surrounded by pristine beaches, which it is, and that there should be kind of no man-made interference with the process of those beaches working their way toward the center of the island, I would submit that it simply does not make sense for Nantucket. And the island's going to be is facing today already, a couple of really good conferences here a couple of weeks ago, these issues, and it needs to get more up the curve. And this is one example, the first example, and I would say at this level of detail, of a process that has been developed that is working very well. It's providing full protection, and it's causing no harm to neighbors. So, larger context.
Thank you. Next commenter? Yes, sir? Shall I bring you the microphone? Actually, if you wouldn't mind coming up here, the other people won't be able to hear you with this microphone. Anyways, thank you. This one, if you use it, you can't. It doesn't actually have that. It doesn't actually work for our purposes. Thank you. Your name and address, please.
I'm Sandy Apgar, 22 Broadway, Sconset, a relatively new owner-resident. Having attended the commission hearing, if that's what it was formally, my wife and I were very surprised at both the nature of the dialogue and the conclusion, partly for the reasons expressed here this morning. We subscribe to what this group, that is the Positive Group, has done and the science and analysis behind it. Just to comment on the presentations this morning, which is the only the second time I've heard the story, the verbal dialogue was relatively clear, but the presentations would have been 10 times as effective if they had been supplemented, even complemented by graphics. This is a graphic subject. It's a highly analytical subject. It's a complex subject, and frankly, I'm surprised that the state office doesn't insist on subjects like this being more effectively communicated. That said, the issues that have been raised, which obviously concern us and the last commenter's point about the rest of the island being affected by environmental conditions, are as real to us as new residents as any of the conditions that have been described. And so we unequivocally support what this group have set out to do and the responsibility that they have shown. We hope that in coming days, weeks, months, this robust question will be raised and resolved locally without state interference or without a higher regulatory body on the sound logic that several of you have described and the future scenarios which are embodied, although somewhat buried, in the reports to date. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, and I appreciate the information regarding more visual plans being presented. Next commenter? Yes, sir.
My comments will be brief, and I don't think we need the microphone. All right. All right. As many of you know, I am very interested in the history of Siasconset. Paul Judy, spending our 50th summer in Siasconset this year. We sometimes think of the history of Siasconset as very much identified with our old section, Broadway and so on. But the lighthouse is a very significant part of Siasconset. 1850. I don't know how many years that is, 130 years, 170 years ago. The center of Siasconset we think of here in this general area, but the Baxter Road area of Siasconset began to develop when Mr. Flagg bought that whole portion of the island in 1873. And from about 1880, when Atlantic Avenue, which it was called then, was changed to Baxter Road, until 1920, that whole portion of Siasconset developed. And those houses and that road and that whole leeway to the lighthouse is a central part of Siasconset, a very central historic part, now at least 100 years old. So it's a very important part of Siasconset to protect. And the houses and the families there are long-standing citizens of Siasconset. Thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter? Would you mind coming up here, ma'am? Your name and address, please. Thank you.
My name is Margaret McQuaid. I've been coming here also for 50 years. And my husband Larry and I have been on the Bluffs since 1980 in rental properties, and then in the early 90s, we bought our house at 97. And it was a big leap of finance and of faith, and became for us a major part of our lives and that of our families, because it became our key gathering place. Alas, over time, we lost first our 2-bedroom cottage, and then 3/4 of our house. We finally moved to our son's property inland, and it was traumatic for us. But more important than all of this to me is that we have lost our faith in our town community to hear the facts and to do the right thing. The town has listened to those persistently spreading misinformation in the face of the truth. Thus, while we have the supporting science, we have not had the supporting goodwill of our neighbors, some of our neighbors. I have Dutch ancestors. Some of you have heard me say this before. They have repeatedly proven that when science and goodwill work together with nature, amazing things can happen, like the whole country of the Netherlands. It is one kind of tragedy when bad things happen that are unavoidable. It is quite another kind of tragedy when bad things happen that are avoidable. That is the case with saving the Siasconset Bluff. I urge you to look at the evidence to help us save what is left of our iconic bluff, and yes, what little is left of my property. Not only for us, but for all of Nantucket, for as everyone who has said so, this seems like a local issue, but it is not. It is an issue of survival of this island community. Thank you.
Thank you. Next commenter, please. And if you are leaving, please do sign in the sign-in sheet. Thank you. Comment? Did you want to say something, Dwight?
I just want to make one comment.
And I will say that if those folks are leaving, you would like to join us on our site visit at the Bluff, we'll be there shortly after this meeting.
Actually, my comment is directed to you, Porvi, to thank you for coming out here. People may not know, but Porvi is out on the island for vacation, and she has taken time out of her vacation to hold this session. So I just want to thank you, Porvi, for your great commitment.
Unnecessary, but thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Would you kindly identify the gentleman that spoke at the microphone that did not identify himself?
I would love to do that. Does anyone know who that gentleman was? Is he here, sir? Would you tell us your name, please? Peter Kellner. Thank you. Yes. So as I mentioned, sir, Mr. Kellner, I'm going to be submitting supplemental information. I'm going to be asking the proponent to provide supplemental information, which I will distribute to those that are on the sign-in sheet. Okay, so your questions about, which I wrote down, truck trips and just affirming that there is criteria for the mitigation conditions for the sand placement. Yeah. Mr. Keller, would you tell us your address? Sorry, what was the number? 39 Quidnet Road. Any other commenters? Did I see a hand?
Can we thank the casino for offering this?
Yep. Thank you for the space, and that was really nice timing to have this big space for the hearing, the consultation session. So we will ask the Conservation Commission, I think they need to adjourn this public meeting. I'm seeing hand waving, but no one is being denied the right to come up and give a comment. So just last one, yes.
I don't have a comment. Are you going to be taking questions? For some reason, I thought you might be taking questions after the comments.
That was part of the comments. Yeah, do you want to come up and ask a question?
Yes, I do.
Yep. Comments/questions. Name and address?
My name is Kate Shea. I'm a 67-year-long resident of Bram Point. And obviously, I concur that the issues that are facing Sconset impact the entire island in one way or another. This is a question really for Porvi, not a comment on the specific, but as I'm trying to learn more about the MIPA process, two questions that came to my mind. One is, you said that this particular project does not meet the threshold for mandatory review. And so I was wondering how that 10-acre calculation when it comes to coastline is calculated, what is included in that. And as the owner of a house that was built in 1912, I am also wondering, what does it mean to be a pre-1978 structure? If a house has been substantially altered or renovated, is it still a 1978 structure?
Those are two great questions. Thank you, Kate. The proponent is responsible for submitting the information regarding the alteration of Coastal Bank. That's something that gets reviewed, or Coastal Resources in general, excuse me. That's something that's reviewed by the Conservation Commission, some questions that they can ask, and then DEP will confirm that area of alteration. So that would include area of permanent alteration impacts and also temporary construction-related impacts where they're driving from Hoyks Hollow to provide the sand template, any of those sorts of temporary construction period only impacts. So they provide that information. DEP, MEPA, and the Conservation Commission would weigh in on how they've delineated those numbers. At this point, based on the temporary and permanent impacts, it looks like it's about 5 or 6 acres total, like 204,000 square feet. So that is not nearing the 10 acres, which is the threshold for an EIR. Okay. So that's that question. Substantial modifications to pre-existing homes. That's a really good question, and I know there's language to that in the Wetlands Protection Act, but I don't know specifically what that alteration or modification would entail that would preclude it from being protected. Gentlemen, would you like to weigh in, or should we provide that sort of information more in a supplemental? Yeah, thanks. I appreciate it, Nate. Come on up.
So the house would be subject to review. It would be more on a case-by-case basis, but in general, some modifications would still qualify as a pre-1978 house.
Thanks. Yeah, so I don't know if there's any specific, it's more of a category of like percent increase, I think. And so, no, oh, so excuse me. As I said, I'm not sure. So that's a very, Nate indicated, a case-by-case sort of situation. So following up with Mass DEP or looking for guidance from the Conservation Commission. All right, if we don't have any further questions, Again, MEPA review, the comments are due on September 10th in writing. You can either submit them via the MEPA website portal, or you can submit them to me directly, purvi.patel, P-A-T-E-L, @mass.gov. And you may also CC Nate Corcoran. He is the DEP analyst, or excuse me, geologist that is reviewing the superseding order of conditions. We will be convening at the site at the top of the bluff and then making our way down to the toe of the bank. Thank you so much for your time and attendance. I really appreciate it.